My name is Jenna Donaldson, and I am 28 years old. If someone had told me a year ago that I would walk out of my parents' house with nothing but a single suitcase and whatever pieces of dignity I had left, I would have laughed. I was the dependable one, the good daughter, the person who stepped in when life got heavy and things needed fixing. I helped pay the mortgage when my father's hours were cut. I restocked the fridge, fixed the leaky pipes, repaired the old fence, and covered the bills when no one else could. My family called me their blessing. And sometimes I believe them. But blessings can be used up, and sometimes they are. My younger sister Melanie was 25 and had always been the loud, unpredictable one. She had a charm that worked on strangers, teachers, friends, anyone willing to fall under her spell. But at home, that charm shifted easily into cruelty. She was the storm we all learned to live around, unpredictable and impossible to prepare for. I kept telling myself she'd grow out of it. She never did. If anything, she learned how to make the storm louder. It didn't begin with an explosion. It began the way most family fractures do, with cracks too small to notice until they're suddenly everywhere. At the time, I had moved back home after losing my job and ending a long relationship that had drained me more than I wanted to admit. I wasn't freeloading. I worked remotely for a tech company and paid a good portion of my parents' monthly expenses. I filled the gaps quietly without complaint because that was what I'd always done. Melanie, on the other hand, had never truly moved out. She still lived in her childhood room, drifting between short-lived jobs and impulsive ideas that required small loans she rarely repaid. She had this talent, a way of making people feel guilty when they said no. Anytime one of us refused to fund her latest scheme, she'd drop her favorite line, soft and wounded family helps family. It worked on my parents every single time. At first, I tried not to let the small things bother me. She would eat the food I bought, take my car without asking, borrow money she pretended to forget about. It was annoying but manageable. I told myself picking fights wasn't worth the emotional cost. My father would sigh and mutter that Melanie needed direction, and my mother would smile too tightly and say, "She'll learn eventually." I wanted to believe them. Maybe I needed to. But the cracks deepened quietly at first. One night, I came home near midnight after finishing a work project. I found Melanie and two of her friends sprawled in the living room, drinking, laughing, and blasting music loud enough to rattle the windows. My car keys were on the coffee table, and my gas tank was empty. When I asked what happened, Melanie smirked without even sitting up. "Relax, Jenna, you weren't using it." Her friends laughed like she'd told a brilliant joke. My mother emerged from her room, saw what was happening, and instead of addressing Melanie, she turned to me with a tired expression. "Jenna, don't start an argument. She just borrowed the car for a bit." I barely slept that night, not because of the empty gas tank, but because of the hollowness in my mother's eyes. The quiet plea for me to stay calm, to take the hit, to let Melanie win, because it kept the house peaceful. That was the first moment I realized something I had been avoiding for years. Peace in our house always came at my expense. A week later, I returned from a late shift to find all my belongings packed into boxes outside the guest room I had been using. My clothes were folded in a rush, my laptop precariously balanced on top. Melanie was stretched out on the bed inside the room, scrolling through her phone like a queen in her chamber. "I needed more space," she said, not even looking up. "Mom said I could have this room." I stared at her. "Melanie, I've been using this room for 2 years." She shrugged. "You don't own it. You're just staying here." A chill ran down my spine. I went to my parents, praying for sanity to prevail. My father didn't meet in my eyes. He fiddled with the television remote like it was suddenly the most complicated object on earth. My mother sighed, looking at me the way people look at someone who is about to ruin dinner. "It's temporary, Jenna," she asked nicely. "You can take the smaller room. Don't make this a big deal." "Don't make this a big deal." That line would follow me for months. It always meant the same thing. Swallow it. Let Melanie have what she wants. We're all tired. I moved into the smaller room, trying to ignore the rising ache in my chest. But once something inside you cracks, it doesn't uncrack. It spreads. Over the next few months, Melanie acted as though the house belonged entirely to her. Parties at all hours, dishes piled in the sink, my belongings disappearing one by one while she feigned innocence. She used the Wi-Fi I paid for to stream movies at full volume while I struggled through work calls in the tiny room my parents had relegated me to. One morning, I woke up early for an important video meeting, only to find the internet completely down. Melanie had unplugged the router to reset it for better gaming speed. I missed the call. My boss was irritated. When I confronted her, she simply rolled her eyes. Maybe don't work from home like some hermit. I snapped, reminding her that I paid for the internet. For a moment, something cold flickered in her expression. Oh, so you think paying a few bills makes you better than us? Before I could answer, my mother stepped in again. Jenna, please, don't start this. There it was again. Don't start this. Don't disrupt the peace. Don't challenge the storm. I spent that night sitting in my car in silence. I remember gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, wondering how I had become the villain in a home I was financially holding together. I told myself I would give it one more chance, one opportunity for them to see me, really see me. It did not take long for that chance to shatter. A few weeks later, my parents hosted a family dinner. My aunt and uncle came over, and Melanie turned on her charm, like flipping a switch. She helped set the table, laughed loudly, told everyone about some vague business venture she was working on. My parents beamed with pride. Then, in front of everyone, she said, "Yeah, Jenna's been living here rent-free while I'm working on my goals." Laughter, even from my parents. I felt my face burn. "That's not true," I said quietly, but the room froze. Melanie smirked. "Jenna, come on, it was a joke. Don't be so sensitive." But it wasn't a joke. It was a warning. A reminder of my place in this house. Later that night, when I tried to talk to my parents about it, my father said, "You need to lighten up," and my mother just sighed again. That sigh, the one that told me to stay silent. That was the night something inside me began to erode. I stopped helping as much. I pulled away quietly. I began saving money. I told myself they wouldn't even notice. But the truth was, they noticed everything, just never in the ways that mattered. And when everything finally broke, it wasn't loud. It was small, personal, cruel, and it was only the beginning. It didn't happen all at once. It rarely does. It was subtle at first, disguised as misunderstandings and quiet accusations, until I realized the truth. Melanie wasn't just careless. She was calculating. And she had learned exactly how to turn my parents against me with the smallest twist of a sentence. It started one evening when I came downstairs after a long workday to grab something quick to eat. I was exhausted, head aching, eyes dry from staring at spreadsheets for hours. All I wanted was a quiet meal and maybe 10 minutes to breathe. But peace in that house had become a luxury item. Melanie was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone with that smug ease she always carried. Without looking up, she said, "Jenna, did you send your half of the utilities yet?" I frowned. "Yes, I paid it last week." She finally lifted her eyes, resting her chin on her palm. Well, it's not showing up. Mom said you were supposed to handle it." My mother turned from the stove, her voice uncertain. "Jenna, I thought you said you took care of it." "I did," I repeated, keeping my tone even. "I sent the payment. I can show you." Melanie leaned back in her chair like she was settling into a show. When I opened my banking app and held the screen out, the payment was right there, cleared days ago. She squinted at it, unimpressed. Weird. Guess it's not showing up on my end. Her tone wasn't curious. It was suggestive, a hint, a seed waiting to grow. My father, from his recliner, spoke without looking away from the television. "Let's not argue about money at the table." "I'm not arguing," I said, trying to hold on to patience. "I'm just clarifying." But clarifying never mattered in that house. Facts didn't matter, only whatever Melanie implied. I went to bed that night feeling unsettled, like I was walking on uneven ground. Something in her eyes earlier, a flicker of mischief, or maybe satisfaction, had bothered me more than I wanted to admit. The next morning, my mother knocked on my bedroom door. "Jenna, could you come downstairs, please?" Her tone already told me everything. Something was wrong, and somehow I was to blame. When I walked into the kitchen, both my parents sat at the table looking serious. Melanie was there too, arms folded, an expression on her face that said she had been rehearsing this moment. There was a printed sheet in front of them, a bank statement. My mother spoke softly, as though preparing for bad news. "Jenna, the mortgage payment didn't go through this month. We're behind." I blinked. "What do you mean I transferred my portion?" Before I could say more, Melanie interrupted with faux sympathy. "Yeah, but you sent it to the wrong account. That's what Mom and Dad were saying. That's why it didn't go through." I looked at the paper. The account number wasn't ours. It was off by one digit. And suddenly everything clicked. Melanie had changed the account number in our family chat last month, claiming the bank had updated it. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? She knew they wouldn't scrutinize her messages. She knew they would scrutinize mine. "You told me this was the new account," I said quietly, even though my heart was pounding. She raised her eyebrows in an expression of innocent confusion. I must have been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That word. Soft, harmless, poisonous. "Jenna," my mother whispered, We really cannot afford mistakes like this. I wanted to scream, to shout that it wasn't a mistake, that Melanie was manipulating them. But their expressions were already set, worried, disappointed, deciding. They had chosen the version of reality that was easier for them to accept, a version where Melanie never lied, and I was always at fault. I swallowed the rage rising in my throat, turned away, and fixed the situation myself. I paid the missing amount again. It drained nearly everything I had saved that month, but I did it just to make the tension disappear. Melanie didn't even look grateful. She only smirked when she passed me in the hallway, later whispering under her breath, "Try to be more careful next time." That was the moment something in me hardened. A small click in my chest, a quiet snap. The part of me that kept giving her the benefit of the doubt stopped existing. But Melanie wasn't satisfied with that. She needed someone to push against someone to crush a little more each time. My silence made her restless. Soon my things began disappearing. My power tools from the garage, my headphones, my laptop charger replaced with a cheap one that barely fit. When I asked about any of it, she shrugged, pretending boredom. "Maybe you misplaced it. You know how scattered you get." Then the withdrawals from our shared household account started amounts I had never taken. When I confronted her, she gave me the same lazy answer. "Relax, I'll pay you back." She never did. My parents always defended her. Always. Even when Melanie's excuses were absurd, even when the evidence made no sense. But none of that compared to the night that truly broke me. It was a Thursday late evening. My mother was crying in the kitchen. My father was red-faced with anger. I rushed downstairs, heart pounding, thinking something terrible had happened. But when I entered the room, they fell silent. "What's going on?" I asked. My mother's eyes were swollen. "Jenna, your sister told us about the loan." A cold wave washed over me. "What loan?" Melanie leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, wearing a look of feigned regret. "The one you applied for using Dad's name without telling him." I felt sick. "What are you talking about? I would never do that." My father picked up a paper, a credit inquiry in his name. We called the bank. Someone tried to take out a loan with my information. "I didn't do that," I whispered, horrified. "I swear." Melanie gave a delicate sigh. "I really did not want to say anything, but you've been acting stressed lately. Maybe you're confused or overwhelmed." She delivered the sentence with perfect softness. Accusation disguised as concern. Poison disguised as care. My mother looked away. We don't know what to think right now." "We don't know what to think." The sentence slammed into me harder than anything Melanie had done. Everything I had done for years, every bill paid, every repair, handled every sacrifice meant nothing. My word meant nothing. I spent days proving my innocence. I contacted the bank, requested documents, and eventually showed them. The inquiry came from a device that wasn't mine. But by then, the damage was already done. Trust was a corpse on the floor. The house felt colder, meals quieter. My parents' eyes less forgiving. Melanie had won, completely. But victories built on lies don't last forever. Melanie didn't know that yet. The real breaking point was still coming. It arrived on a night I will never forget. We were all in the kitchen. Tension hung in the air like thick fog. My parents had received the mortgage notice, late payment again, because I had stopped covering it. My father stared at me. "Jenna, did you forget to send the payment?" "No," I said calmly. I didn't forget. Before he could respond, Melanie slammed her hand onto the table and pointed at me. "You can't just stop helping Jenna. This is all of our responsibility." I laughed, a small bitter sound that felt foreign coming from my own mouth. "You mean mine," I said, "because that's how it has always been." Melanie's face twisted. "If you're going to act like this, like you don't care, then you don't belong in this family anymore." My father looked down. My mother stayed silent. They didn't defend me. So I walked upstairs, packed my things into 2 suitcases, and left the house without a single tear. There was no screaming, no dramatic goodbye, just a door closing behind me, quiet, final, full of everything they had never said for me. It was the end of my role in that house, and the beginning of everything else. When I left my parents' house that night, I had no plan, only the raw instinct to survive. I drove until my fuel gauge blinked red, then pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of a highway gas station. I turned off the engine and just sat there with my hands on the wheel while streetlights cast pale circles on the asphalt. The silence inside the car felt unfamiliar. Not peaceful, but strangely hollow, like stepping into a room you once lived in and finding it stripped bare. People talk about leaving home as if it's a single moment, a slammed door, a suitcase, a decisive step. But the truth is, I had been leaving them for years. What happened that night wasn't the beginning of my departure. It was the final crack in a structure that had been collapsing slowly, quietly, long before I realized I was standing inside it. I checked into a cheap motel, the kind with flickering signs and rooms that carried the stale scent of bleach and old carpet. My body sank into the lumpy mattress, but my mind refused to rest. I scrolled through my phone, staring at messages from my mother, none of which asked if I was safe. They were all the same: the bills, the house. What have you done to us? Not a single question about me. Not even a pause between concern for the mortgage and accusations about my responsibility. That night I stared at the ceiling until dawn, realizing something I had been too afraid to admit. I hadn't lost them that night. I had been losing them piece by piece, year after year, every time I swallowed my hurt to protect the fragile calm they worshipped more than me. Within a week, I signed a 6-month lease on a small studio apartment. Calling it small felt generous. My bed took up half the space, and the kitchenette hummed loudly whenever the refrigerator kicked on. But it was mine. No shouting, no slammed doors, no second-guessing every word I said. Just a small, quiet space where I could hear myself think again. The loneliness was overwhelming at first, the kind that sits heavily in your chest at night. I woke up some mornings expecting to hear my mother's footsteps in the hallway or my sister's voice demanding something. Instead, there was nothing. A quiet so deep it almost echoed. Work became my anchor. I buried myself in tasks, taking on extra projects, and volunteering for anything that kept my mind occupied. Exhaustion became a strange comfort. At least when I was tired, I didn't have the energy to relive every accusation, every moment they chose Melanie's comfort over my well-being. But life has a way of inserting light into darkness through cracks you didn't even know existed. His name was Bryce, a coworker who sat 3 desks down from me at the office we occasionally used for meetings. He was patient, thoughtful, in a quiet way, never pushing into someone's space unless invited. I had worked with him on small tasks before, but never really spoke to him beyond polite greetings. That changed the night we both stayed late finishing a complicated software patch. The office was almost empty, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound between us. "You ever go home?" he asked lightly as he walked past my desk. "Not lately," I said, half joking, half admitting more than I intended. He paused, not judging, not prying, just noticing. "Long week." I hesitated before answering. "Long year." He smiled, not the kind that tries to fix you, just the kind that says, "I hear you." For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. Over the next few weeks, Bryce became a steady presence. Not intrusive, just consistent. He'd stop by my desk to ask if I had eaten. He'd remind me to get up, stretch my legs, take a breath. At first I thought he was just being polite, but there was something sincere in the way he paid attention, something I wasn't used to. One afternoon, when I was too exhausted to fake composure, he found me sitting alone in the break room. I don't know what he saw on my face, but he pulled up a chair without saying anything. Just sat beside me, letting the silence settle until I finally whispered, "My family and I. Things got bad." He didn't interrupt. He didn't dismiss my hurt. He waited. So I told him. Not everything, not yet, but enough about the favoritism, the accusations the night I walked out. His eyes softened, not with pity, but with understanding. "Jenna," he said gently, "you can't rebuild a life in a place that keeps tearing you down." The words landed inside me like warm water in frozen soil. Something softened, something opened. We started taking lunch breaks together, then walks after work, then weekend coffee. He never asked for more than I could give. He simply showed up steady, dependable, the way I had once been for everyone but myself. Meanwhile, my parents' situation deteriorated. Without my financial support, the cracks they ignored for years widened fast. My father's hours were cut again. The mortgage slipped behind. The bills piled up. I knew it would happen. I had been the one holding the dam together, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. My mother finally called me one evening, her voice small. "Jenna, mate, the bank is talking about repossession. We're months behind." A pause. "Can you help us?" The familiar instinct surged in me, to fix everything, to shoulder their burden. Again, to save the home that never saved me. But beneath it was something steadier, clearer. "Boundaries." "I'm sorry, Mom," I said softly. "I can't do that anymore." She didn't get angry. She just sighed, quiet, disappointed. "You're abandoning us," she didn't say, but I heard it anyway. When the call ended, I sat on my bed, staring at the blank wall. For once, the heaviness didn't crush me. It stayed there, but so did I. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I wasn't bending. In the weeks that followed, Bryce continued to be a quiet, stabilizing force in my life. There was warmth between us, not rushed, not forced, just two people slowly gravitating toward each other. When he talked about his own past, a manipulative ex-girlfriend who had used him, drained him emotionally, and painted herself the victim, our experiences lined up with uncomfortable precision. We understood each other's wounds without needing to dissect them. Months passed. My project at work succeeded. I earned a promotion. My pay increased. I moved into a slightly larger apartment, still modest, but with morning sunlight that spilled across the floor like a promise of something gentler. I filled the space slowly, secondhand furniture, a few plants mugs that matched for no reason except that I liked them. Slowly the walls stopped looking bare. Slowly I stopped feeling bare. One morning while brewing coffee, I realized I had gone an entire week without thinking about Melanie, or the house, or the mortgage, or the lies. A week. It felt impossible. But peace never stays uninterrupted. Because one evening, as I was closing my laptop, letting the quiet of the apartment settle around me, my phone vibrated. A message from Melanie. "We need to talk. Things aren't the same without you. Call me." I stared at the screen not with fear or anger, but with clarity. She wanted something. She always wanted something. This was not reconciliation. This was an opening move. And I had no intention of falling into her script ever again. I didn't answer Melanie's message. I didn't even type a single reply before locking my phone and setting it face down on the table. The old version of me, the Jenna who bent, who soothed, who ran toward every crisis in that house, would have responded in minutes. She would have apologized for things she never did, offered help she couldn't afford, tried to mend a relationship that had always been one-sided. But that Jenna was gone. I had buried her gently, with respect for the girl who had tried so hard to keep a broken home from collapsing. The version of me who remained was different, quieter, calmer, but sharper. A woman who had learned the value of distance. A woman who had discovered that silence can be a shield, not a surrender. I placed Melanie's message in a mental box, sealed it, and went back to my evening. The past no longer dictated my present. But it wasn't finished with me yet. A week later, curiosity nudged at me. Not the desperate, self-blaming curiosity of old, but something colder, steadier. I wanted to understand her situation, not to rescue her, but to see clearly. So I watched. Not obsessively, not emotionally, simply observing the same way. I tracked patterns in my data work. I checked public records, social media, mutual acquaintances. Over time, a picture formed. Melanie wasn't reaching out because she missed me. She was drowning. Her business venture, which she had bragged about at the family dinner months ago, had fallen apart. Debts were piling up. A failed crypto project, unpaid investors, a trail of burnt bridges behind her. My parents had tried to save her again, stretching themselves thin financially, but there was nothing left to stretch. Their house had already been repossessed. They were renting a small place now, and Melanie, prideful as ever, refused to move in with them. None of it surprised me. A life built on manipulation and charm eventually collapses, but what did surprise me was how quickly the guilt inside me had evaporated. I didn't feel responsible, not anymore. Her choices were finally meeting her. My own life, in contrast, was stabilizing in ways that felt fragile but precious. At work, my promotion had given me more confidence and more visibility. Bryce and I were spending more time together, and the gentle warmth between us had begun to settle into something deeper, though we hadn't labeled it yet. His steadiness anchored me. His presence didn't demand anything. He showed up without expectation, without pressure, the opposite of everything I had grown up with. One evening, after a long day, the two of us stayed late, finishing documentation for our software rollout. The office was nearly empty, city lights glimmering through the windows. "You seem quieter lately," Bryce said as he organized a stack of reports. "Not unhappy, just focused." "I'm thinking a lot," I admitted. "About your family." I nodded. "And about who I'm becoming." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with that thoughtful expression he always carried when he was listening deeply. "You know, growth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just choosing not to react." "I'm trying," I said softly. "I used to think strength was doing everything, solving everything, absorbing everything. Now I'm realizing strength might just be stepping back." Bryce smiled. "Your ex never understood that, did she?" I shook my head. "No. She wanted me to take responsibility for her moods, her decisions, even her lies. I thought that if I just tried harder, it would fix everything." He exhaled slowly. "My ex-girlfriend was the same. The more I gave, the worse things got. We didn't need to say more. Some wounds recognize each other instinctively. In the weeks that followed, I worked on myself in ways I never had before. Therapy became a routine. I read books about boundaries, self-respect, and emotional resilience. I journaled. I walked alone in the evenings, letting my thoughts drift without rushing to suppress them. I learned how to hold space for myself, something no one in my old life had ever taught me to do. And slowly a new mindset formed. I did not need revenge. I did not need confrontation. I did not need to prove anything to Melanie or my parents. All I needed was clarity and patience. Because the truth is, people like Melanie eventually trap themselves. Not because someone pushes them, but because they never learned how to stand without leaning on someone else's sacrifice. A month after her first message, Melanie made her next move. She posted on social media about a major investor conference she had been preparing for her big comeback, as she put it. It was the kind of event where one convincing pitch could secure funding, a lifeline she desperately needed. She bragged about it frequently. Photos of her rehearsing, videos of her practicing hand gestures, dramatic captions about resilience. It was almost painful to watch. But I noticed the cracks behind her curated persona. Overconfident claims, numbers that didn't add up, partners she name-dropped who weren't actually affiliated with her, a pitch built more on appearance than substance. Once upon a time, I would have jumped in to warn her, to save her, to protect her from consequences she wasn't prepared to face. Not anymore. This time I simply observed. It wasn't vengeance to let the truth catch up to her. It was inevitability. Bryce became my sounding board. Night after work, we talked on the balcony of my new apartment in the quiet corners of coffee shops during long walks where the city noise faded into background hum. "Make it quiet," Bryce said once, sipping his coffee. "Not confrontational, just quiet." "Surgical," I murmured, tasting the word. "That's it," he said. "Surgical, clean, precise, no chaos." That word settled into me like a seed. Surgical, not emotional, not messy, just truthful. People assume strength comes from loud, dramatic action. But the strongest changes, the ones that reshape the trajectory of a life, often begin with a whisper. I didn't sabotage Melanie, I didn't lie, I didn't twist anything. But I prepared the truth to be seen clearly. I revisited public records she had edited, financial documents she had exaggerated, social media claims that contradicted each other. I shared none of it directly, but I ensured the right people, investors, analysts, attendees, were positioned to notice. Small things, tiny nudges, barely traceable. Enough to create transparency, not destruction. On the morning of the investor conference, I woke up early, made coffee, watched sunlight spill across my kitchen counter. The world felt calm, balanced. For the first time in years, I felt in control not of others, but of myself. That was all I had ever needed. Melanie thought she was untouchable. She thought charm could fill the gaps where competence should be. She thought she could stand on a foundation made of borrowed credibility. She was wrong. And as she prepared for the biggest pitch of her life, the truth was waiting for her. Not because of me, but because truth, when given space, reveals what lies try so hard to hide. The morning of the investor conference unfolded with the kind of clarity I had come to crave. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't conflicted. I wasn't even angry. I felt steady, almost peaceful, like someone who had finally learned how to live without looking over her shoulder. I didn't attend the conference to gloat or interfere. I was simply there to observe, to witness quietly and without emotion a truth I had spent years trying to force into the light. Melanie had built her world on illusions, and illusions, no matter how polished, cannot survive scrutiny. The event hall was sleek and modern, filled with sharp-dressed investors, analysts, and business owners whose eyes scanned everything with calculating efficiency. Melanie arrived wearing confidence like a costume. Her hair was perfect. Her smile rehearsed her movements tight and choreographed. If someone didn't know her, they might even believe she belonged there. But I did know her. I knew the tremor in her hands when stakes were high, the flicker in her eyes when she was improvising, the brittle quality of her charm when she felt cornered. And beneath her practiced demeanor, I could already see at the cracks. Bryce and I kept to the side of the room, blending into the crowd. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He stood beside me in quiet solidarity, which is something I had never known growing up. Support that wasn't transactional, presence that didn't demand something in return. Melanie's presentation began strong. Her voice carried smooth, confident, polished. She displayed charts, graphs, ambitious plans, promises of exponential scaling. Investors nodded, some taking notes. A handful looked impressed. and for a moment I almost believed she might pull it off. But then came the questions. The first investor asked about cash flow projections. Straightforward enough. Melanie gave a vague answer, rehearsed but thin. The investor pressed again, requesting specifics. Her smile faltered for half a second, so quick most wouldn't notice, but I did. Then a fund manager raised her hand. Your expense sheets list partnerships with companies that haven't publicly announced involvement. Can you verify your contracts? That was the second crack. Her voice hesitated briefly, but noticeably. The third question came from a sharply dressed man near the front. We found inconsistencies between the financial statements you sent us and the publicly available filings. Could you explain why the profit margins appear inflated? Silence rippled through the room like a sudden shift in air pressure. Melanie's face tightened. She tried to recover, conjuring up the charm she always relied on. But charm doesn't fix numbers. Charm doesn't fix lies threaded through spreadsheets. Charm doesn't rewrite documents. It took only one more question, a request for transaction verification for everything to collapse. One of the attendees had already begun looking through the digital handouts Melanie provided. Some of these invoices look duplicated, he said, and 2 signatures don't match. A murmur spread across the audience. Melanie froze. The mask unraveled. Her shoulders curled inward, subtle but unmistakable. Her breathing quickened. Her voice wavered. She tried to backtrack, to explain, to spin, but the questions kept coming, each one sharper than the last, slicing through her confidence with precision. Investors weren't rude. They were clinical, professional, factual, methodical. They asked for audits, documentation, verification, proof. She had none. Bryce leaned closer and whispered, "She's crumbling." I nodded, but there was no satisfaction in it. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel anything like triumph. Watching her unravel in front of strangers didn't fill me with revenge. It only made me see her clearly for the first time. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't a villain. She was a person who had never learned accountability. Someone who relied on manipulation because she didn't know anything else. And this public confrontation with reality was the consequence she had never been forced to face. After the presentation ended, in quiet disaster panels of investors huddled together. Phones buzzed. Attendees whispered. Melanie disappeared backstage, attempting to salvage her dignity, but the damage was done. The cracks had split open, revealing everything underneath. Within days, the fallout began. Investors withdrew interest. Formal requests for audits arrived. A few parties filed complaints about misrepresentation. One firm pursued legal investigation into falsified documents. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, it was a controlled descent, professional and unrelenting, a slow unraveling of lies that she could no longer outtalk. The consequences moved faster than she did. My parents called me. 2 days later, my mother first. Her voice was frantic, trembling. She had heard about the conference fallout from one of Melanie's former partners. "Jenna, everything is falling apart. They're talking about legal action. Your sister said people are turning on her. We don't know what to do." For the first time in years, there was no accusation in her voice, no subtle blame, just fear. Fear of a world she couldn't manipulate with tight smiles and denial. My father called shortly after. His voice, usually stern or dismissive toward anything involving conflict, was softer. "We should have listened to you," he said quietly. "We didn't want to believe it, any of it." There were no excuses, no justifications, just a tired man confronting the cost of his own choices. I spoke with them, but gently. I didn't rescue anyone. I didn't offer to fix anything. I didn't sacrifice myself again. I let them sit with their reality. Over the next few months, things shifted slowly, cautiously. My parents made small efforts toward reconciliation. They asked how I was doing, not just what I could provide. We shared a few dinners, short phone calls. Nothing dramatic, just tentative steps toward something healthier, something real. Melanie, meanwhile, descended into a spiral. The investors she once charmed stopped returning her calls. Her friends, those who benefited from her social glow, distanced themselves. Her debts mounted. Legal proceedings tightened around her. She tried contacting me again. More messages, long paragraphs, emotional pleas, then anger, then silence, then more pleas. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. I had spent my entire life cushioning the consequences of her actions. There was nothing left for me to protect her from, not without sacrificing myself again. Her self-created disasters were no longer mine to solve. One evening, months later, Bryce and I walked along the river as the city lights reflected on the water. The air was cool, the kind of quiet night that encourages honesty. "Do you ever regret not confronting her directly?" Bryce asked. I shook my head. No. I used to think revenge was about proving something, but now I know the truth. What's that? That the most powerful thing I ever did was walk away. And stay away. He took my hand carefully, not claiming it, just holding it, respectfully, gently, a gesture that asked nothing and offered everything. "You didn't destroy her," he said. "I didn't have to," I replied. "She built a world with no foundation. I just stopped being the foundation she stood on." We walked in silence for a while, not heavy silence, comfortable grounding, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. When the legal dust settled and Melanie faced her consequences, I didn't feel joy or anger. I felt settled, balanced, done. One afternoon, I walked past the house. My parents had lost the place where so much pain had lived. It looked different with new owners. The porch freshly painted, the yard cared for, the windows glowing with a warmth I had never felt from inside those walls. I stood there for a moment, not with longing, but with gratitude. That house had broken me, but it had also freed me. I turned away, walking toward a life that was finally mine, built, not from sacrifice or silence, but from strength. In the months that followed Melanie's collapse, the dust settled in ways I didn't expect. Not dramatically, not explosively, just slowly like a long storm, finally beginning to clear. The legal proceedings surrounding her business reached their conclusion with formal consequences. Not prison, but heavy fines, mandatory financial oversight, and a professional reputation so damaged she would spend years recovering it. For the first time in her life, Melanie had to face a world that didn't bend for her, a world that demanded accountability, a world that reflected back the choices she had made instead of cushioning them with someone else's sacrifice. My parents, forced out of their old patterns by the undeniable fallout, changed in small but meaningful ways. Their new home was modest, quieter, almost humbler. When I visited the first time, my mother met me at the door, not with expectations or questions, but with an expression I had never seen on her face, something that looked like remorse. We talked at the kitchen table for hours, though it wasn't about blame, nor demands for money, nor revisionist history. It was about us, what had happened, what they didn't see, what I had carried alone for so long. They didn't justify anything. They didn't pretend everything had been fine. They listened, really listened. My father spoke the least, but the words he managed to offer were enough. "We should have protected you too," he said quietly, "not just your sister." It didn't erase the years behind us. It didn't magically restore trust, but it opened a door, a small, careful door, to something healthier, something earned instead of expected. I learned to rebuild with them slowly. Short visits, occasional dinners, boundaries firm ones that no one questioned anymore. I didn't carry their bills. I didn't fix their crises. I didn't morph into the dependable daughter who made everyone else's life easier while tearing myself apart. I simply became a daughter again. Just a daughter. And that was enough. As for Melanie, she reached out again, but her messages were different now. Not manipulative, not angry, just desperate. Apologies wrapped in self-pity. Explanations that skirted responsibility. Pleas for help disguised as reconciliation. I didn't respond. Not from bitterness, but from understanding. She wasn't reaching out because she wanted a relationship. She was reaching out because she wanted stability. Stability she had always taken from me. I had learned the difference. One afternoon after work, Bryce met me downstairs with 2 coffees in hand. He had a way of appearing exactly when the weight of everything felt a little too heavy, as if he understood the shape of my silence even before I said a word. "I talked to my father today," I said as we strolled toward the river. "It felt easy, for the first time." Bryce smiled softly. "Maybe you're all starting fresh." "Maybe," I said. "But not by starting over. By starting differently." He nodded, as though he understood something about me that even I hadn't fully articulated yet. "You've changed so much, Jenna. In the best ways." We walked along the waterfront, the city lights shimmering across the surface like scattered gold. For the first time, the future didn't feel heavy or uncertain. It felt open, steady, and if I allowed myself to admit it, hopeful. Our relationship had not rushed. It hadn't been built on emotional dependence or shared trauma. It grew the way things do when they're healthy, gradually supported by mutual respect, trust, and an understanding that neither of us had known before. One evening, as we cooked together in my apartment, his hands chopping vegetables beside mine, The smell of garlic filling the kitchen, he paused and looked at me with that calm, grounding expression he always carried. "You ever think about what you wanted to do to your sister?" he asked gently. Not accusatory, just curious. I stirred the pan thoughtfully. For a long time, I wanted her to feel what I felt, unseen, unsupported, abandoned. I took a slow breath. But more than revenge, I wanted to stop being the one who paid for everyone else's mistakes. And now, he asked. And now, I know that I didn't win because of what she lost. I won because of what I finally gave myself. Peace, boundaries, self-respect. A life I chose instead of a life that was chosen for me. Months later, when the legal process ended completely and the chaos surrounding Melanie finally settled, I went for a walk by myself through my old neighborhood. It was spring, the air cool and soft trees budding with new leaves that whispered in the breeze. Without planning to, I found myself standing across the street from my parents' former home, the place where everything had broken and everything had begun. The yard was neatly trimmed. The mailbox was new. The windows glowed with warm evening light. It didn't look like the house I remembered. It didn't feel like mine anymore, and for the first time that realization didn't hurt. It healed. I stood there for several minutes, not out of longing, but gratitude. That house had shaped me. It had wounded me. It had freed me. It had taught me exactly who I refused to become. I turned away and walked back toward a future I had chosen brick by brick, a future built on steadiness, accountability, and the gentle growing love I was letting myself finally accept. When I arrived home, Bryce was on my balcony watering the plant he had given me months before. He looked up as I approached, smiling like he always did, warm, quiet, and genuine. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, stepping into the evening light with him. "More than okay." Because I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn, years to feel, years to truly believe. Strength isn't loud. Healing isn't dramatic. Peace isn't something someone else grants you. It's something you choose every day, in every quiet boundary, in every moment you refuse to shrink. And I had chosen it. I had learned to stand unbroken. And that more than any revenge was mine.